Another famous artist from the trans community that's very powerful is Wu Sang. She's a filmmaker, artist, performer in New York City, and has received the MacArthur Genius Grant, and is very much sort of contemplating a lot of different ideas through performance and installation. Kind of makes these works that include a kind of innumerable sort of images and sets, and sort of you'll have a performance and a video and sort of physical work and etc. So focusing on filming, but also on a lot of different sort of mediums, materials, intersectionality, etc. You may have noticed that I called Wu Sang her, and I'm going to talk about this sort of full story that has to do more with some of these other ideas in conversation with Moten, which is a collaborator with Sang. But basically, um, Wu chooses the possessive pronoun of choice as she, even though she is not female. She talks about some of her work and this ongoing refusal of the imposition of such choices and every other mode of self-determination. So she particularly goes by she, even though she does not identify as a she, to sort of um, be I don't know, to sort of be against this idea of sexual binaries, and to sort of use it in protest, basically, is what I was trying to say. So the first work we're going to talk about is Wilderness, which is a famous feature documentary released in 2012 about a trans Latinx bar in Los Angeles called the Silver Platter. According to Tsang, when I was making it, I was approaching it more as an activist trying to be a filmmaker. I felt there was an important story to tell about the lives of my friends at the bar, many of whom were trans women and undocumented immigrants, often struggling with overlapping invisibilities and thriving despite intense conditions of violence and policing. Tsang had not sort of gone to like film school or studied it at all, but wanted to make this film and sort of move through their mistakes. And so in this film, Tsang offers a deeply felt portrait of the Silver Platter before the Stonewall riots. It is playing with ideas of fiction, but also documentarian structures, documentary structures. Goodness. And about sort of the art world's conversation about these images. Another work that's sort of more recent is a collaboration with Freeze and Gucci in a series and video Into a Space of Love. This is very much in video. I think it's about 30 minutes long. I have it on Canvas, which is about the fashion influence and the way 1980s underground culture contributed to this, with the vigilance of youth and house music, and creates this kind of visual image of that idea as well. Also, Tsang made this film, One Emerging from a Point of View, which is a conversation about the migrant crisis. According to Tsang, we are trying to find ways to tell a story differently in creating this film. The film runs over 40 minutes, is a mesmeric montage of magical sequences, looking at the migrant crisis on the Greek island of Lesbos. sort of at the height in 2015, and talking about how do you talk about this stuckness or stillness. I think the story in Lesbos is one thing that has been stagnant about the lives of people who have been severely traumatized by this circumstance but are continuing to live, and also about people who are stuck there. So Tsang made this film, and very poignant at this time again with the migrant crisis sort of internationally. Additionally, Tsang is in a relationship with Boy Child, who is a famous performance artist in her own right, who's also sort of non-binary trans, but goes by she, her pronouns, as she believes that her sort of self on stage performing is female. And so Boy Child is very much invested in kind of these very creative and powerful ways of utilizing the body and performance. And Tsang and Boy Child have worked together in sort of creating works collaboratively, as well as being in a romantic relationship. The first work that the two of them worked on together, and probably the most famous, is A Day in the Life of Bliss, which is about sort of current society and the use of social media and surveillance and rethinking it, in creating this sort of very fictional story, in which a world of artificial intelligence called the Looks control humans through a panoptic social media platform known as Prism. And you follow Bliss, who is the main character, and played by Boy Child. And they track all these changes between people in dominant space, in society, and how it's dependent on the looks, but there's also resistance. Bliss is a pop star by day and an underground performer by night. Looks cultivate a celebrity-obsessed culture to feed their frequencies. Stardom begins to corrupt Bliss, overtaking her capacity to absorb it, and she must accept herself and realize her potential and fight against sort of these looks. And so they created this sort of video, which also has sort of performance components as well as sort of photographic images. I put a bunch of quotes in here about what this sort of film is about. I like this sort of series of quotes by saying, the whole industry manipulates us, the internet exaggerates our celebrity obsession, it gives us distractions, but it also gives us constant reminders of how fucked up the world is. We're living in a constant state of distraction and of feeling hopeless and emotional. So very much kind of people being invested in this social media lifestyle and then sort of not knowing how to live outside of that. So not only as they created sort of that film and photographic series, but also performances as well on stage. Including Tsang wearing this sort of LED light dress. I put a bunch of images of Boy Child and Tsang together in magazine spreads because they're super interesting and gorgeous. And so I just wanted you guys to see them and look at them and sort of see this very collaborative spirit between the two of them. The next work I have in here is Love is a Rebellious Bird from 2019, which plays on poetry and is a 2-act performance exploring some of the legacies of cabaret and drag, science fiction opera, the golden age of Hollywood, and the combination of live and cinematic realms. and very much supposed to be based on and taking into consideration Elaine Cassin's book Love is a Rebellious Bird, about young love and the unreliability of this sort of young, fierce passion. Um, Tsang has also worked a lot with Fred Moulton in making works like Miscommunication and Mr. Ray. And a lot of these, um, I don't know, video installations are very sort of experimental and about different sort of constructs and ideas. So this one in particular about long distance communication experiment, as well as Girl Talk, which I referenced previously. And Girl Talk was also very important and interesting. When Girl Talk was shown in the New York Museum exhibition, triggered gender as a tool and weapon in 2017, New Yorker critic Peter Schindel, um, who highly recommended the piece, characterized Tsang as Moten's longtime female collaborator. Tsang and Moten took issue with the phrasing and co-authored a short letter to the editor. Wu Tsang is not Fred Moten's female collaborator. It would be more accurate to say that he is her intermittent familiar and will be divine. And so, again, this conversation about them working together, them creating, and then this desire to sort of genderize the individual who's creating the work, like Tsang. Tsang has also sort of taken breaks to create physical sculptures, such as Pay No Attention to the Man Behind the Curtain, which is a big piece of Swarovski crystals, and wanted to create this in sort of a powerful and strong way, very much relating to the scene where Oz is revealed to be the Wizard of Oz. Tsang says that there's sort of a lot of queerness in Swarovski crystals, whether that be sort of the wearing of them by drag groups, or what have you. But a very sort of gorgeous work. Wu has also made this physical work, which is called You Sad Legend, which is a sculpture made entirely out of 200 bronze swords. And the last work we're going to look at by Tsang is her Sustained Glass. And in these works, she is attempting to show the historical representation, so starkly constructed by two different views of sort of glass blowing, as well as modularity of other groups, and inverts the tradition of stained glass windows, depicting allegorical stories as images, glass illuminated with texts that fade in and out of legibility. Some of the quotes also coming from Moten's recent book, which is previous collaborator, called All That Beauty, and an essay, Sudden Rise at a Given Tune. So utilizing music was this work as well. This is also Tsang talking about sort of gender binary and the issues with that. As well as sort of other ideas. I am going to show you guys a quick little video of Tsang talking about her work, and so I'll play that here for you.
For me, filmmaking is a space of emotional truth to shift the way that people think about others. My name is Wu Sang, and I'm a filmmaker and a performance artist. I work mostly with moving images, so my practice is very centered around filmmaking and conversations with the history of cinema and also with video art, installation art. I do performance, that's my process, and I'm really interested in the relationship between performance and film, between liveness and images that are captured. I didn't go to film school, so I never was formally trained as a filmmaker, but I did get into filmmaking because I was a community organizer, and I discovered that making films was a way to bring people together, and that when everybody can kind of get together and do what they love to do best, something comes out of that that's bigger than any one of us. For the last 5 years, I've become increasingly interested in the form of a hybrid documentary fiction.
I'll never forget the first time I walked in.
This process started when I made a film called Wildness. Wildness is a feature documentary, and I like to say that it's in the genre of magical realism in the sense that the main character of the story is actually the bar.
Les he estado sirviendo en esta misma esquina por medio siglo.
So the bar has a voice and it speaks and narrates the story alongside my character. Wildness, I think, was just, there was such an intersection of so many issues, including this gentrification issue, including immigration issues in Los Angeles at the time that are now even more intensified. I've always been really drawn to this possibility of underground spaces. I think what excites me about them is that they are spaces where everybody mixes. It's a space for desire and for people to express themselves and to also lose themselves and to feel connected to other people in a physical way through music and dancing.
Once we slept beside each other, falling asleep to the sound of rain at night.
The story of Dulian is very personal, just like all my other projects. The first time I went to China, I went with a lot of expectation of discovering my roots, so to speak, and in the process of not finding what I was looking for, I found the story of Chojin, and I was curious to find out more. And what we discovered was this very beautiful story about her and this other woman named Wu Ziying, who was a calligrapher. It's about a love story that really speaks across time. I think I sort of had this fantasy about what it meant to have a sort of mainstream format of a film. I don't really question anymore, who is this for? How is this going to communicate? I really just try to say what I feel needs to be said in the way that I need to say it. And I find that the work finds itself out into the world where it needs to go.
I'm not quite sure why I called that documentary Wilderness? Wildness. Nailed it. The next artist we're looking at is Tuesday, I believe, Smillie or Smillie. I cannot find a pronunciation of her name. She is an American interdisciplinary artist utilizing traditional craft materials to rethink the aesthetics of protest. These last two artists are not as well known, but I think their work is very interesting and accessible. For example, she has done a large series having to do with banners and rethinking protest banners. So, for example, this is Street Transvestites from 1973, specifically remade in 2015. And we looked at this banner when we talked about the Stonewall Uprising, because it is the Star banner made by Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. It is ornate, meticulously sewn, and painted trans-liberation banners that could not get the radical point across more lovingly. And so you have this sort of way in which she rethinks this banner with uses of lace, and creating this very interesting introspective look at these banners. And kind of looking at these banners as relics, lost objects that have been washed away by historical narratives, and rethinking these ideas. Some of the other banners are a little more sort of introspective. They sometimes include I lost my place, sorry. More of her reflection on poetry, and looking at these sort of intimate moments, versus sort of a specific protest banner. And utilizing them to talk about trans issues in the media, and these conversations that can be discussed in creating these sort of protest, quote unquote, protest banners. I really like this one, which is Gender is Greater Than Genitals, from 2013, and is very sort of reflectant again on these sort of large protest statements, and these sort of resonating ideas as well. She has made kind of different collages and images as well based on some of these Christopher Street protests, very much kind of reflecting on some of these ideas, and looking at kind of rethinking sort of traditional or images from protests for trans visibility. I think I have a description of it here in a minute. Here it is. Knowledge is the labor and love of the trans and non-binary people who have come before, giving thanks to for the path they have blazed for us, carrying their vision forward on New York City streets. She has also worked on this series in which she creates new watercolor and collages based on Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness, which is a seminal science fictional novel that takes place on a planet inhabited by androgynous humanoid species. As a side note, she's also been working as a part of excuse me, the Museum of Trans History and Art, and has been working on this project, which I find really interesting, called I believe 99 Objects of Trans History, and about sort of looking at and representing and thinking about trans history through personal objects. And when I was kind of looking into it, I stumbled on this work, which I find interesting, by Nikki Green, which is called It's Almost As If We Existed, Trace in Una, which features this sort of more classical looking vase, but with sort of penis shapes on the top of it. And she does sort of these really playful pieces of pottery that also reflect in sort of controversial ideas, such as sex reassignment surgery here in these images, in this work called Operation in Bright Sunlight. The last artist we're going to look at, again, that's a little less popular than the previous ones, is Yishay Garbasz. And her work, again, is investigating sort of this construct of gender binaries, as well as sort of reflected on her own personal body as a locus for this idea, such as her work Becoming, which is from 2010. In this, she displayed images of her body before and after gender affirmation surgery as the second largest zoetrope in the world, as well as a flip book. So using this sort of, it's kind of like a zoopraxiscope where you have this sort of movement, and you sort of watch her sort of change, her body to sort of change in this space. Which also features a flip book featuring her sort of transition as well. Let me get that up here for you. And yes, I did Google how to pronounce her name. No judgment on that front. Probably my famous work by her is Eat Me Damien from 2011, in which after she had this surgery to preserve her balls in formaldehyde, and very much kind of mocking Damien Hirst's work. And so she has her testicles in this formaldehyde, and is supposed to be sort of playing on the satirical idea of sort of Damien Hirst's shark work. And you can sort of read about it here. It's directs a cutting edge of sarcasm toward another famous piece. Damien Hirst put a dead shark in a fish tank filled with formaldehyde and called the work The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, and was sold in for $12 million. The innate machismo embedded in various interpretations of this work, such as that the shark represents a predatory tactic employed in business, or that a shark represents a similar tactic often unleashed in the art world, the male-centric and predatory point of view is replaced by the highly personal, humorous, and indeed irreplaceable feature in Eat Me Damien. I challenge the embodiment of power and playing with the meaning of consumption. Who is consuming who? And the sort of final set of works is In My Mother's Footsteps from 2016. In this work, she specifically traces back the physical steps of her mother and her trauma in being a Holocaust survivor. She traced her mother's steps path for a year, often on foot. She states, I needed to see firsthand what remained of my mother's memories. My mother left parts of her soul in those places, and I intended to go back to collect them. And as I am a photographer, the camera was going to be my tool to help me see. And Garbasz's father also made her mother write down her story, and these accompany some of the photographs as well, and sort of telling you the story of these images and why she was there, and sort of what she was experiencing. And the final piece of this is Branding from 2011, in which she branded her mother's Holocaust number on her arm as well, to connect with her viscerally. However, in doing this, it still allowed her to have it heal, so that as Garbasz brand disappears, the border between these two kinds of memories is exposed. So that is all the artists. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it's a long bit of information, but to give you sort of a general idea of the work they're producing, and I will make another PowerPoint slash presentation shortly having to do with other artists that we didn't get to talk about this semester, as well as information on your presentations. So I will talk to all of you then.